Alrighty. This should be my stream, and I am going live. I got off to a bit of a slow start. Here, let me take away for a second. I'm just fooling with the screen a little bit, don't mind me. Pause my screen without me on it. It'd be less distracting that way. Let me pop out chat. Not that there's anybody in chat yet, but, you know, if there was. And begin setting everything up. There's our chat. I am still waiting on a light thing that I'd really like to engage, but I can't engage just yet, so we'll do without it. And I'm going to take a moment and set up my computer screen and stuff. Alrighty, microphone engage. Let's see about getting a respectable level on this that can be loud if it has to be, but not too loud, and that seems tolerable. And alrighty, so welcome to the coding stream. Oh, hang on, I got to do a further thing. Namely, my picture-in-picture is done with an atem macro, and I got to run the macro that makes the picture-in-picture go. And it's got to be a small picture-in-picture because people still need to be able to see the screen. Alrighty. And now it's set, so I can go back to the big screen or not if I choose. Let's shuffle some of these keyboards and things around. Hi, Lorenzo. Jorv. I was a little bit slow out of the gate today because I had snow shoveling to do. That being one of the human things one does. You know, when you're not a corporation or a wealthy executive that hires people to do things, you got to shovel your own snow, maybe carry your own firewood, which I do a fair amount of the time too, all that kind of stuff. That is the cost of human scale business as we might have it. Oh, well, hi there. I'm doing basically maintenance stuff on some of my plugins today, so we'll see how that works. Appreciate the saying hi. You know, it's a funny thing. I heard from the corporate programmer brother recently. He pinged me. He was like, please ping me back so that I can know that you're not dead. And I'm like, you can see me like literally every Monday? Oh, yeah. Please do. It's a ConsoleChannel. Channel is a separate thing, which I'm probably also going to work on a little bit today. But yeah, we have been talking about it on Gear Sluts. And that's what I got in mind. As you can see, my little screen, and my process for doing this is, let's just have a look. I'm going to look at ConsoleChannel and also Cascade just in case, because that might be even more of a thing. So we're concerned here. Also, give me a sec. I'm going to grab something. I'm not going to run this dev laptop on the internet anymore. Last time I did it, all the virtual machines started trying to talk to servers and breaking themselves. Like the Windows virtual machine and the Linux virtual machine broke themselves because they were able to connect to the internet. And then things stopped working for no good reason. So that's terrible. Also, I got a variation on my lens that I can use where my little picture-in-picture can be a little more of a close-up. Hopefully that'll work out. So yeah, here we are looking at, firstly, this is the USB stick. I'm going to transfer this over and make a special download for people momentarily once I've compiled this again. And here is ConsoleChannel, the very thing that's not working for people all the time. And here is a possible explanation for why. This. Now what's happening here is that it's scaling things by the absolute input sample and then dividing it again. And this part won't have a problem with it, but this part would, or might. Because what's happening here, and I'll do a little character turn so that you can see it on its own thing, is this part of code says input sample equals 0, question mark. And if the answer is true, you get the first option, colon. If the answer is false, you get the second option. The second option is absolute input sample. So if input sample is equal to 0, we don't try to divide by it. If input sample is anything that isn't 0, we try to divide by it. Now fabs here, that's absolute value. It'll take negative and make it into positive. And the deal with that is fabs should overload for all variations on floating point numbers. It should do float, it should do double, and it should do long double. But if you had a long double and in running fabs, it like randomly made everything be floats for no good reason, here's what would happen. You'd have really tiny numbers, some of them, down near 0. And if you converted it into float, some of them would just be turned to 0 by converting them to float or to double. And with this, you're going input sample equals 0, and you're measuring it as a long double. So it'll go, tiny, tiny number, this isn't 0, fine, let's do it. And then it converts it using fabs. And if that makes the thing be 0 by mistake, you're now dividing by 0 and everything might fall over and die. So here's what we're going to do. We don't actually need to get the absolute value to test whether the thing is 0. But if we do it, it'll do the same thing for comparing it as it does for dividing by it. We'll get the same result. So if it made the thing become 0, it'll start not trying to divide by it. It'll go to 1 here. And this is not supposed to be a bug fix. Because the thing about it is, here I think I'm a little bit loud. Let me, there we go. Tone it down just a touch. The thing about it is this should work. But if Fabs is breaking and is not working for long doubles, this would explain what's broken. So we're going to try this. And this stuff, like input sample divide equals gain chase, we do go if 1 is not equal to gain chase and 0 is not equal to gain chase, then we'll divide, meaning that it will not try to divide by 0. But this is the one where it changes between the comparison and the application. So I'm going to have a look at that. And what we're going to do is we're going to build it. We have to build it twice. What you see here is that this version of Xcode, it doesn't really understand what it's doing until it has built stuff once. See, 64 errors. And it says the first thing, one thing you in C compilation, very often the first error is going to be your problem. It says AU effect base H, no such file or directory. That's not actually true. Like AU base and all this other stuff here, other bases, there it is. So it simply didn't find it the first time. However, if I build a second time without changing anything, it's fine. That's the peculiarity of Xcode, of this particular Xcode. May continue in other versions. This is the kind of stuff you deal with when you're making these plugins and code and compiling stuff, is stuff is supposed to work a certain way. Like, you're supposed to be able to trust that absolute value, it's going to honor the long double thing and not convert it to something else in the process of working on it. But Catalina may have started that happening. So we're going to find out. And we have done this change. And we have a release. Where did I put my USB stick? So we're going to just make it be a zip, because that'll save us a little bit of space, and that's what I routinely do. Move it over to the main computer and step away from this other one for a moment. I got my super close-up going on. And then what we're going to do here is, I'm running a program called Cyberduck, which is my FTP program. Also, I could probably focus, but maybe that's not the first thing on my mind. Not worry about it right now. And I'm going to put it next to new updates.zip. So here's our first job for today. Test this and see if that works. Because if this is the thing that happens, I'm going to assume it could happen anywhere. I'm going to assume it could happen in Linux, in Windows, and that it's not just exclusively Apple being foolish and breaking things. If this is an easy thing to break, then I want to be careful about it. So we'll include it in all the versions of everything. And one further thing I'm going to do, I think, is let's rename it now that we got it. Or at least try to. No, there we go. I'm also going to have a glance at the, yep, please do rename. I'm going to call it ConsoleChannel test, and then let's go and get a link. I'll go to Airwindows, get a link, and see whether I can't paste it into chat and also paste it into the Gearslutz thread. By the way, I've been learning how to make better coffee. I can tell you how to do that too. Firstly, let's copy this link address and that was a spacebar. That's not what I wanted. It's not in the right position. And let's copy that. And then let's also download it just to see. So let's see, did that post? I think it posted. That should be a direct link to the file we just made. And Brian, the issue with Catalina and subsequent things is that some folks are having difficulty running the plugins on it. It is breaking for them. And that is bad, so we're going to try to avoid that happening. Trying to focus a little better there. Alrighty. Well, if that works, I'm going to go back online and post it to the gear slot, seeing as I said that I would. Not quite podcast live streaming gold, but if anybody was reading the thread, they'll probably want to know. So let's do that. It did download for me too, so. Alrighty, post that. And let's get back to our video doing. Yup, ConsoleChannel component is the final file name. So yeah, how I am making coffee is in this wonderful cup. I grew up with this cup in my family. It was my mom's favorite coffee cup, and I always coveted it like mad, and could never have it until I finally inherited it. It is this Italian cup. It's just very cylindrical, and it has a nice little picture on it. It's old, but so am I, and it's quite nice. But what you were asking about is the actual coffee. There's a couple of different kinds of coffee that I like to drink. I'm a fan of, I think it's Pierce Brothers Fogbuster. And there is a kind of coffee called Berkeley Shark Bite, which is not Pierce Brothers. I'm not exactly sure who makes it, but it's in my local co-op. And I can get it. It's the same people who make like Ahab's Revenge and stuff. And I'm making it in a little Melita cone coffee filter. And the trick is in the technique and in grinding the coffee up properly. So what I've done is I have this little sort of hand grinder. It's very, very cheap. Apparently I can do better in terms of fancy grinders, but it's partly about it being just easier to turn the crank and slightly, more even. And I've come up with an interesting little workaround for that. I've also come up with a constantly looking at my face on the screen, so let me quickly move OBS half off the screen. There we go. So there's two ways to get super even coffee grinds, especially for your like pour over in a cone filter stuff, where you do it a little bit at a time and then let it drain out and then do a little bit more and come up with the right timing and the amounts of water that you pour in to get the correct amount of extraction. And the differences between that is it'll go between being sort of more bitter and more sour, and just all the little flavors start coming out when you do it right. So, and I am drinking it black and pretty strong too. So if you over extract, it will be more bitter, and it's more or less all about the same caffeine wise, really. And if you under extract, it will be more sour and not as bitter. And if the coffee grounds are large chunks, it will under extract rather than over extract. If the coffee grounds are a really fine powder, it will over extract because the water can heat them up and get into them very easily. And so when you get really fancy, expensive coffee grinders, part of what they're about is like you have this sort of Burr grinder because the little whirling blade things are terrible at making all different sizes of coffee particles. The Burr grinders can make the particles much more consistent in size. There's even a kind of burr which I should look into called a ghost burr, which is especially good for super coarse coffee grinds. And if you do your pour over or French press, you might use a super coarse coffee grind. However, the one I've got is like reasonably okay. Thing is, it's kind of like with all manner of creations in terms of mechanisms, musical instruments and stuff. The difference between cheap and expensive is things like build quality, the amount of play in the bearings and stuff. And I'm looking around trying to see if there is a good visual aid that I could use for this, but I don't think there is. Oh, well, kind of. Here is a hex knob, which I want to maybe put on my guitar unless I use another one. And if you have a burr grinder, it's like this thing turning inside a metal container. Yeah, I have this Hario, like a $20 burr grinder. It's just this thing, which is a sort of little tapered thing with a handle on the top, and you turn it around. It's not huge, but I'm making them one at a time anyway. If you have this little burr grinder, you have this thing that will turn inside a sort of the opposite part of the burr, really, the enclosure. And stuff to get through the burr grinder has to be ground up fine enough that it falls out the bottom. So a large coffee bean isn't going to fit. But if you have a cheap grinder and you have a big piece of coffee like sticking out over here, it'll literally push the burr this away. And it does two things. One, the big piece can fall through more easily because you push the burr out of the way. And two, everything on this side just got ground to a finer amount. So when you have a burr grinder, even though it is still better than the whirling blade thingy, the electric one, if it's not a super fancy one, it could be sort of moving around as it's grinding stuff up. And as such, it'll produce all different sizes of grinds. Excuse me, I'm a little hoarse. So one way to do that better is to get like the ghost burr, whatever, fancy things that are better at like sharp rather than coarse burrs will slice the coffee up rather than just powderize it, so grind it up by crushing it. Because if you grind it up by crushing it, you get powder off at the back of it. And there is an alternate thing for if you're doing this and you're generating these fairly coarse coffee grounds. I was watching a guy, one of the Loading Ready Run crew, Serge Yeager, who is a coffee fanatic and has such a joy about all of that stuff. And he demonstrated his method of doing pour over coffee. And I went, holy crud, this guy is grinding his coffee so coarse. That's amazing. I had no idea you could. So I gave it a try and I was like, this is cool. This is a whole new level as far as flavor without excessive like sourness or bitterness or anything like that. So I started trying to grind it more coarsely. If you do that, you want less of the sort of powdery coffee as part of the grind. Here is the sort of Airwindows trick for not having an expensive coffee grinder. I might get one just because it would probably last for absolutely forever, and I expect to continue drinking coffee on into the future, so it's something that I do repeatedly all the time. Might as well have something nice for it. If you don't, you can still get the same evenness of grind of the silly expense, like you can get $100 or $1,000 coffee grinders, including just manual ones. Or you can use the $20 like Hario hand grinder or whatever else is available there, and empty it out onto a piece of window screen with a piece of paper underneath it. And you fold up the window screen and tap it and shake it around a little bit so that all the really fine dust falls through. Boom. You have now replicated the quality grind of a stupidly expensive coffee grinder, which is not to say that I might not still want to get one of those someday, but just so you know, the point is not the cost of the grinder, the point is the result. If you want to make the powder go away, go in a sieve or a piece of window screen or something like that. If you're doing sort of pour over coarse coffee roast stuff, the pieces of coffee bean you're interested in are going to be a lot smaller than a coffee bean, but they're still larger than the holes in a window screen. And that's really all you need. So that's what I've been doing, and that's what's in this cup right now. And I've been quite happy with the results, although it's the usual thing of like, well, you can spend a lot of money or you can spend time, intelligence, and ingenuity and put some effort into it and get to the same place. That's me doing the poverty boy thing of being able to get as good performance, but just with a workaround. And I'm looking to get into that with like the synthesizer making and stuff. I've been working on that quite a bit, actually. All this morning, I was running this synthesizer over here and setting it up in new ways. I'm probably going to move the camera that focuses on it in closer and could have streams of just composing something using that, because I've got a variety of things that I can do with it. If people really wanted, I could do that today. I'm thinking about adding another day, and because like going into the winter holidays, I usually push and try to do many things in many days of the week, and then I burn out and I have to rest up for a while. And we're probably getting to where I can ramp things up a little bit again. But for now, there were some things I wanted to do code-wise. Let's set that up. And yeah, I am a Finn, among other things. My grandma was named Eili Kakaiman. I am a Finn fairly close to my immediate family. Which is not all great, because some of my history back there, some of those Finns had issues, man. But we have all survived that so far. Let's get back to some of this. So here's our Console 7 channel, and if that change fixed things for people, there's a number of things that I can do about that. One of them is let's search for this string. That's going to live in every form of plugin that is doing this thing. And it's probably going to tip me off to everything that should get fixed if that was in fact a fix. If it wasn't a fix, there's not a lot of point dealing with it. We'll just have to see. But yeah, we're going to look in plugins in general. And let's find all. I'm going to have to run off and get a piece of paper to write this stuff down. But so here's where we're finding this. There is an instance in Console 7 bus, so anybody testing that, maybe you want to leave bus off for the testing purposes. I'll write in the back of these notes are for chord progressions. I've been evolving that as well. Remember how I made these cards? I'm probably going to need to write a computer program for this stuff, just so that I can firstly generate all the cards so that I can get some printed up nicely. And secondly, do something so that I can generate this stuff and people can see it, so that they can make their own thing out of like a couple of decks of playing cards and a Sharpie. Because if I could do this, you could do this. When I do actually made cards that are kind of fancy and stuff, those are not going to be cheap. Those are going to be I'm going to trouble of doing this, and this is something that the wealthier Airwindows fans can enjoy. Which is why I'm also going to make it possible for people to make these things themselves with Sharpies and doing it this way. And they can have like my original version, but in a way that they built and made themselves. And the fancier versions can be like, you know, Eno's oblique strategies and stuff, something that's kind of ritzy and flash. And something where if it became a big hit and I found myself doing that constantly, I'd make some money, which I can turn into doing stuff for synthesists and plugin fans and stuff like that. Like one of the things I've been talking about with somebody on email is they want me to do a particular TIAC/Tascam mixing board. And I was like, well, I don't emulate things, but here's what I do is I have the plugin channel, which is just a coloration plugin. And I'm actually kind of due for an update, because if I can sort all of this stuff out, or if it's nothing I can fix, and this is just me working for people that don't have broken OSs, I need to include the anti-aliasing stuff in channel. It's one of the most popular plugins I do. And when I'm going to the trouble of doing that, it might also be fun to add a couple of like quote-unquote models to it. I got the Neve, API, and SSL, and those are just names. Well, it will be a Tascam and a Mackie, Because the guy wanted this particular Tascam, and when I looked into it, I was like, yeah, you're right. That is kind of a classic old school, early hip hop house music kind of thing. It's actually a fairly popular piece for that. And then of course the Mackie. We're not talking the Mackie 8 bus here. We're talking the Mackie that Daft Punk's first album was made on. That one. So I'll be looking at doing versions in the channel plugin for some of those, and I think I will be able to. They have characteristic like roll-offs and things. Oh, I certainly have not. I'm not sure Pensado uses anything I do, although it starts to pop up now and then. Like somebody who was I got tipped off that somebody who was a big deal was using Purist Gain somewhere, and I was like, cool. Somebody is taking an effort in trying to manage their stuff as well as they can. But no. Nobody like that has asked me for anything. But the thing about channel is I can upgrade it. And that's part of what would be happening. Firstly, what I have in mind is coming up with a bit of a workaround for the low sample rate folks. I feel like I should be able to, and this might be something I try to do today, or at least at some point today. I've got about an hour and 15 minutes for today's session. These things should be able to have their own cutoffs. Like, it's a fair criticism that automatically doing everything on the basis of 20K cutoff is not necessarily good. I had people complaining about Console 7 that it was too rolled off in the extreme highs. And I don't agree with that because my sound off of that kind of stuff, having a certain amount of coloration come in on the roll-off in the service of better aliasing prevention works for me. But if I was to model an SSL desk, I wouldn't be able to do that. The SSL desk clearly will push a little higher, and if I push high enough, like if I'm rolling off at 23K, I think that running at 44.1K, your biquad filter will break. I think it's actually possible to do that so that if it's set wrong, it'll just break and not work. So what I'd need to do is run some checks, just checking to see that this one particular parameter is lower. I think it would be lower than 0.5 is what it would have to be. Well, I've got an example right here, so let's look at one. See how we're doing the aliasing thing, and it's direct form 1 and long doubles temp sample and all of this. And if you didn't have this here, if you just skip this out or you put it in an if statement and didn't use it, it would be not applying the filter. You could calculate the parameters of the filter just fine. But if applying it made stuff break, and again, biquad A 20K divided by get sample rate, so the number has to be 0.5 or less. And I could test that. I could say, hey, guess what? It's 40K, which means at 96K, you just have a little bit of range in there, and it's going to try to roll off at 40K. But at 44.1K, you're nowhere near being able to get that far, so you want to just skip it entirely. And that should be doable. And again, in Console 7, I like having the slightly warmed off, slightly rolled off extreme highs, because a lot of the stuff that I do, you can always work around these things in a DAW if you really needed to. Oh, Brian, the thing about adding the high end that you want in with an EQ is that you can define Console 7's job as preventing aliasing. It's not really that important to roll off like right at 20K. That's not a really reasonable constraint. but it fits with what I try to do with console and the sound I like to get out of mixes. No progress in Ardor at all. So when I do channel, I think we're going to be calculating distinct roll-offs for every single one. Like it's going to be SSL is slightly the brightest, and then API will still let stuff higher than 20K, but maybe not way higher. And then Neve is going to be either 20K or closer to it, and the cheap consoles, the Tascam, and this is from what I hear as well, the Tascam, the cheap Mackie, those are going to maybe roll off a little lower than 20K. Meaning that they might engage at low sample rate operation, but of course they'll function at high sample rate operation. And when people talk about the warm sound of this really cheap old mixer and so on, some of the time that's because it's bad quality op amps. And I can model that with the slew clipping in channel. I can come up with new versions of slew clipping that are even more restrictive than the most restrictive of the current models. It'll be even more obvious. The distortion will be the same as it was, because that is the thing that goes into Spiral, which is, again, another update. Let's start writing some of these things down. I had this list and needed to write it. I'm going to wait and see if anybody had a success, otherwise I'm not going to go to the trouble, but there is also the possibility of find and replace for fixing all of this stuff pretty much in Text Wrangler over the entire size of the code base. That's a handy thing. So first one, console bus, then Cascade, channel. I'm not sure why it's still showing up. Oh, it's showing up because I fixed it, but the search question that I have in there still covers that. And of course the VSTs also do this, but they're doing it on the basis of input sample L and input sample R, so that's a separate one. Oh yeah, well, I'm glad you're having fun with matrix verb. It is one of several that are going to come out along those lines. Now we start looking for other examples of this. So we got Cascade and channel in the VST versions, yes, but I think it goes beyond, or does it? Interesting. So in that case, why am I not finding all of my possible examples? Let's look a little harder. I feel like that should be finding some other stuff. So much so that I'm going to go looking. I know I had Spiral in, for instance, Spiral. What does it look like in the code? There's a space. That would explain a lot. So we're going to go back and search for this again, but this time with a space. And that's not going to have any of these other ones, but I'll tell you, apparently it's an ADT. I have no idea how that worked out. I didn't think I had revisited that. Let's write that down. ADT, BitGlitter has it. Channel 6 through 8. And it seems a lot of this is actually, well, maybe it's going to, no, we've got the VSTs as well. So we can still do search and replace, but I want to write down what was involved. Distortion most definitely has it. Focus most definitely has it. That's kind of focus's whole point of being. Holt, interestingly, has it. Pop, apparently. And of course, spiral and spiral too. Tape has it. Tape is another example where I need to get the anti-aliasing stuff in there. That will suit itself to tape extremely well, because I can manipulate the cutoff frequency to relate to that and iron oxide, actually. And I can manipulate the cutoff frequency to work with what the plugin is already doing as far as going darker or brighter. And lastly, unbox. Okay. So now we have our list of candidates for possible fix if this turns out to be what is causing Catalina to become upset. And I'm really not sure how that's going to work out, because the thing is, it really shouldn't be having a problem. I mean, it really shouldn't be having a problem, because the C++ spec says if you're doing long double and fabs, then fabs will give the absolute value of a long double without otherwise changing it. So it shouldn't be a thing, but we're going to find out if it is. Maybe I'll be finding that out later. One thing I can do, however, just for fun, is let's make these be consistent. This is sometimes something that's worth doing. Anywhere, oh, here, I'll move it over so you can see it. Anywhere that does not have a space there, now needs to have a space there. Replace all. And I'm going to close this window. I might as well close that entirely. Now we're going to replace all in the plugins folder. It's save to disk and show results. The results are multiple versions of Console 7. We're all using that. And now if I go back into it, there is no functional change to what I just did. But now, if I do a find and replace, it'll have them all together. I could have done the opposite. I could have made it be no space between the things. But I decided to have there be a space. Here we are. So we will see how this goes as far as whether people find that useful in any way. Maybe I'll take a moment and let's go and look at Gearsluts and see if anybody posted results. You're not seeing that, but I am. Go and have a look. I've got a response for Matrix Verb. There has been no response on Console 7. And probably Matrix Verb is a positive. Yep, Corrosive Abuser is enjoying it. Cool. Yeah, the reverb stuff went fairly well. I feel like the reverb stuff I've been doing recently has borne fruit quite a lot. Although I feel like the one that I'm going to come out with, which is reverb proper, just that all by itself as a name, I honestly think is better. Even though it can't do the plate or the spring or has, it doesn't give you the flexibility of changing everything all around, It has a single size control. I'm not sure if I even did this on stream. I think I might have done this on my own. It has the single size control, and everything about it adapts to that. It tries to go from a convincing small room or even tiny closet to giant, enormous, humongous place. And every step of the way, it's like softening things relative to an appropriate sounding room. And the overall dissipation of sound, high frequencies in air, is consistent whether it's a large space or a small space, and that's not usually what you get when you're doing something like that. It's all scaled cleverly so that every setting is good. And that's the intent of that one there. So that's coming out, and that should be interesting. Gosh, we could play with preponderant, but I did say I was going to look into a further channel, so it's probably worth doing. I can at least start that. I've got another like hour and 5 minutes to go here. There's no reason I can't give that a start. Let's dive into it. Starting with channel 8. What I'm going to do is make a channel 9 project and then copy my stuff over here. Kind of like what I was doing when I was spending a week doing just VST porting. And I'm not normally going to be doing that as far as live streaming, because it's fun showing you the grind that I have to go through for some of these things, but it's not super interesting and it's not imaginative in the same way, because you don't want it to be any different. Let's do a nice little mono, or technically what we call N2N plugin. We do that by not selecting Cocoa View. The templates that I have made, I can do a stereo version by selecting Cocoa View, but I'm not doing that. I replaced what I had. And channel 9. And I think if I'm doing it this way, I am probably going to put in, it'll be a little bit like Console 7 bus, in that it will have a ultrasonic filter going into it and then also coming out of it, because channel is meant to be a tone colorer, so having it suppress anything that might have come out aliasing wise just kind of goes along with it, and it doesn't really hurt to like repeatedly filter. Ultrasonic is like 5 filters in series, so having a couple of things where, you know, like the output of this is a filter and the input is another filter isn't going to hurt anything. It'll just make it a little bit steeper, and that's all. So version numbers, I see I'm using numbers on this. If I had been doing that with console, it would have saved me some trouble, but I never did. And if you double click, you only get a single question mark, so that's cumbersome, but channel 9 is my ID for this one. And we got an assortment of stuff to copy over here too. Here's our header file, H is for header. And you know, I'm going to leave some of this the way it is. I'm going to leave the extra controls because I'm going to want to fool with them as I'm setting it up. That said, some of this stuff I don't know why it says fourth value is pick attack. That makes no sense. That's what it says in channel 8, but oops. So the way this is arranged is a little peculiar. I think I can do these in any order, but what I am doing here is leaving some of this stuff available. Let me move this out of the way. Let me try to get this back. I'm going to copy these as well and include them, but then I'm going to edit out the ones they've just done. So default value in 2 and 3 have now been replaced with what I just told them to be, and parameter 2 and 3 have now been replaced. But I've still got all these other ones that are going to be there. So I'm going to code in stuff where I can like try to set up the default values for some of these parameters for the new things. Like maybe I can run the whole thing at 96K, put some audio through it, and fiddle with the cutoff of my ultrasonic filter and see what sounds right as far as where I want it to sit, and choose an appropriate setting for Neve and API and SSL, basically just off the top of my head, because I don't have large format desks of those descriptions sitting around for me to listen to. But I can at least get something that seems reasonably plausible, I think, especially since it shouldn't be obtrusive. I'm not going to be doing any of these crossovers like way below 20K. And I'll probably be able to hear something, especially if I use decent like headphones for it, or pipe it through the main listening system, something like that. So we'll leave all of that stuff alone. This also stays because this enum gets cut back to be smaller once I only have so many controls. If I have only 3, I go 0, 1, 2, and then num parameters becomes 3, becomes the next one in the enum. Enum is making these be sort of constants. And then I'm going to be pasting some stuff in from the previous version. Don't think I need Text Wrangler open anymore. So it's doing a really bad job of showing me what I want to say. Oh, because I'm choosing the wrong thing. There we go. See, that's what I was just talking about. And I want these variables, and then we'll go from there. So from FPD to, and also notice that this is not blue, and that's because I've changed it and I haven't saved it. If I save it, it turned a subtle blue. That denotes, now that I've saved it, the Xcode knows that it is a thing now. It knows that it is a defined variable that exists somewhere. Do the same thing here. Those will also change to a blue. That shows me that Xcode knows that those variables are somewhere. And now we're going to go over to the C files. And same deal. Let's start at the top. This one has 3 parameters. This one has 10, because we're going to fool with some of them to lock in the correct values, and like write down my amounts and then go with that. But some of this other stuff, like this I'm going to be updating pretty much while hanging out and talking to you guys. This is not even in my template code, because my base template code does not have pop-up menus built into it. This is from a pop-up menu for the audio unit. So what I'm going to do is copy this. This is what I'm going to want for starters in the channel 9. And where did I find that? Oh, and that is get parameter value strings right here. So if you don't have a pop-up menu, no matter what you do in there, it's always going to be invalid. But we're replacing it with real information. And this is, for one, it's checking to see if it's the first parameter, because the pop-up is the top control. On the VST, it's still 0 to 1. It's just a normal one, although I do write a name in in the appropriate spot, which some of the hosts even know how to do. With this, I'm going to be adding a couple of more menu items, and that's going to happen a little bit later. But it's doing this thing. What this means, effectively, and I'm not great at this stuff, but what it means is you're getting past something having to do with the scope of the audio unit, and it needs to be audio unit scope global, which is a number of some kind. I'm not sure what number this is, but in scope needs to be this number. And, because that's what this means, is and, logical and. In parameter ID is the parameter we're using, and that has to be parameter 1. Otherwise, nothing happens. It just falls right at the bottom of the routine and nothing happens here. We call this, it does stuff. We're passing in this thing for out strings, but it actually does seem a little bit weird. I don't see an else here, but it seems to work just fine. Yeah. If outstrings is null, meaning there is no array to put these things in, return no error. No error is probably another key number of some kind. If you do not return, we go on to the next thing. So if outstrings is not null, we do this. If outstrings is null, you do the immediately following thing, and then after the semicolon, go on to something else. And if you return, it means we stop being in this get parameter value strings at all. Essentially, when it says return, jump to here and go away, go do something else. If it's not a null, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. They're spaced weirdly. And then return. And if neither of those things happen somehow, we're going to return invalid property, which is some other kind of complaint. So we got this so far, so good. Next thing we want is to define these things correctly, and that's going to look a little different too. Mostly, parameter 3 is just the output level, and it's 0 to 1. Parameter 2, I have reading as a percentage, and parameter 1 is the pop-up menu. What that looks like is this. We don't have to copy over parameter 3 because that's the same as our default version, but both of these ones are changed. And what's going to change is it's going to change the parameter unit to something else, indexed. And the min value and max value aren't going to be numbers, they're going to be these variables we defined. And we define them as equal to numbers. This is kind of just to show you which thing you're on. And the default value is also going to be, actually I think it's going to be just default value param1 again. And then this one, parameter unit percentage, means draw a little percent in the end of this. And again, unlike in VST, we can set min value and max value to be anything we want. We can even set it to be logarithmic, which means all of our values in the middle of the control are much smaller and it gets bigger as it goes to the extreme. Although we can also fake that in a variety of ways. But boom, we've changed it. Now we're percent. We go to 200% in terms of the amount of distortion we can produce. And indexed, kneve, KSSL, param1 is going to end up being a number. We'll be able to compare the number it is to like kneve. K essentially means constant. It means like, let's say that was 0 or 3 or whatever. We can always compare an integer value to is the integer value equal to kneve, and it will look up what that means and go, oh, 3. And it'll find out whether it's 3 or not. Let's move on. We're also going to want to initialize our stuff. And this is previous version of Channel 8. I was not instantiating FPD the way I do lately. So you're going to see a change here as well. I'm not copying that. I want the newer version, which is built into my new template. New template says this: FPD equals 1, and while it is less than 16386, it is equal to a random number times a big number. So I'm trying to make every instance of these have different randomness, which somebody suggested on stream a while back, and I took them up on it. So this is what I do from now on. The new stuff includes that, and it affects console, and it also has a very positive result on stuff like the reverb, because the reverb instantiates all of its vibrato controls. They move at the same rate, but they all have different phases when we start them up. So that means that the mono sounds diverge in the stereo picture in the recent reverb because it does that. It's using this technique. It's using instantiating it in reset, but it's instantiating it to something random. So here we are, and we have flip. Flip is part of my very slow bass roll-off, the IIR filter in this, which is not an effective DC block, but it's a good sounding filter. So we're going to keep it. We're going to use it for the newer versions, which are rolled off higher than the large format consoles. The tiny consoles that we're going to be adding, the Tascam and the Mackie, are going to roll off a lot higher. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to build the Tascam and Mackie in as just dummy examples, which are going to be the same as like the SSL or something. I'll just copy the numbers over, and then we'll start setting up the controls for fiddling with them and coming up with new values for them. I don't know why I have FP temp here, because I don't think it does anything. In fact, I'm sure it does not. That doesn't live there. But no point editing that, because what I'm going to be doing is taking this and going everything from in frames to process on down. Boop, copy. Nothing further to copy in this. And everything from in frames to process on, well, hang on. I think I might be getting a little ahead of myself there. Let's check. Let's check to see whether that's really something I want to do. Do I have anything around here that I would want to update? Because this is my old code, and this is the newest template, which has everything I've done most recently. So our newest, see, this stuff is going to be about the same, I think. Yep. This stuff is template code. This, it's the same avoidance of what's the name of that floating point stuff that we do? Denormalization. It's the same avoidance of denormalized numbers. It's causing that very faint little noise in there if the numbers are in fact denormals. But, and we've got a, oh look, channel 8 has the updates in capacitor. Interesting. Channel 8 is going to be moving, like channel 9 is going to be taking step after step. There's a lot going on in this now. I had forgotten how much was going on in here. There's our processing. I'm not sure how, maybe that will do good things with the higher cutoff of the new stuff I'm going to add. And then Let's see. Last sample A. Love my golden ratio. Must have been an appropriate thing for doing that. And, oh God, excuse me. Let's see whether this floating point dither is actually the same as the previous. FPD minus... I'm going to say yeah. So since the floating point dither is the most recent version... Oh, DJ Alex, I don't do that. I don't do that stuff. I don't think that's the appropriate way of working with the plugins. I get that you do, but typically I don't put those links in other than things like, for instance, pressure. Some of my compressors do that. Now what I've just established is that since neither of these things are changed from the thing, I can in fact... Oh, were we off the screen? We're off the screen. That's why we can't copy. We can in fact copy this and paste it in. Now I will have all of those other controls accessible as well. Like it's only mentioning param 1 through 3, but I have all the other ones available too. That means I don't need to have that handy. And this probably means I can probably build it. It's doing its usual, oh, maybe not. Well, let's find out. It's going to try to. It's 86 errors. That might be too many. Nope. It was fine. So now we have a working plugin, but it's not actually different from the previous. And the reason I don't like links between the input and the output is that it is generally impossible to make that be accurate. I think you should consider it to be the two separate functions that it actually is. Because unless you are not doing anything, you can't actually make that be accurate. Different things distorting in different ways, at different levels, or favoring different frequencies, or giving different harmonics are going to have different apparent amplitudes, and you think that you're doing a volume compensated, but you're really not. It's lying to you if it's just literally trying to keep the same level. It's either going to make the distorted stuff be too quiet, or it's going to make the distorted stuff be too loud, and it'll be fooling you. So I won't beat it into the ground. It's dealing with me, sometimes you have to run into these bits of stubbornness where I'm like, I do thing this way, and this is the way thing must be done. Let's dive into... Oh, I mixed using bus color 4 yesterday. Fair enough, man. Technically, I could see bus colors getting the filtering updates. I hate to dive into it, but it wouldn't be that hard to bring up to speed. I always resist bus colors because I don't really want to push that kind of thing. Like it's fine for some people to do, but I don't see myself as being the one to go to for model of your brand name thing that's somebody else's property. I just don't, that doesn't really fly with me. That said, I'm working right now on channel 9, which is labeled in various ways, but I've always made it very plain that this is for you being able to associate given results with characteristics of things, but it's not really a model in any practical sense. Let's add our additional things, shall we? Firstly, put my coffee cup down on my sleeve. Default value is still going to be the first one. Now we also have to change the names of these or it'll get an error. I'm going to call them Tiak and Mackie. On very much the same rules as these other ones. I'm going to be making it very clear, guys, this is not really putting the thing in, but if you're going for a particular kind of flavor and that's how you associate it, I've done my level best to make it balance. And now we got to update the other stuff that has to do with this as well. I don't have a max default value to look for here, so we go from 1 to 5. But I do have menu items, and those are spelled out much the same way. Tiak and this is where we get our words. I have found some YouTube videos, by the way, that demonstrate stuff like this. There's one fellow who did some kind of house thing that he was running a house beat through an Alesis 3630 into his Tiak board and hitting it good and hard, and it really had that like warmth and slightly fuzzy thing that people were talking about. You could plainly hear that's like, oh yeah, that's a distortion device. And that's also an op amp being driven extra hard, all of that kind of stuff. I could hear it, so I can try to interpret something else to relate to it. Also, the person that was asking me to do the Tiak furnished some audio files of raw sound and then the sound going into the Tiak at a bunch of different levels. So I'm going to be able to refer to that too. That'll be even more handy, because I'll be able to try to make the plugin mimic what the output sound ended up being off of the real thing. That's usually how I do this kind of stuff. I'm not modeling schematics. What I'm doing is finding general categories, abstractions for how stuff is done, and then tuning in the values by ear to match something that I can also hear. So let's go on from there. I got our 5 things. This does not change. This does not change. And now we're going to update some of these things. That's going to be fine for now. This needs an update. 2 more. And note when I type the last letter, it will turn blue, indicating that the compiler knows this is a value. Boop. It's like, oh, I know what that is. That's 5, right? Or more likely 4. It's probably counting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because computers often do that. You're almost going to graduate your high school. You want to learn machine learning in the future. Should you be aware of anything? That depends upon how philosophical you want to get. You want to have an elaborate conversation about machine learning, or... Gosh, that's going to be a real distraction. Like these things will always have biases. You just don't necessarily know what they are. That is a thing having to do with machine learning. What it can do is, it's much like if you're doing those word generation things where you can spout out massive quantities of gibberish that follow English grammar. Machine learning is kind of like that. It can generate like hallucinatory images based on some form of construction of things and putting them together, the whole neural network stuff. It's wild stuff in its way, and it's a bit of a window into the vulnerabilities and limitations of us humans. But it's generally not going to have a purpose unless you give it one. This is why I switched my synthesizer stuff away from the synthesizer generated randomness, and I'm likely to put something together that can still do that. I've saved a bunch of the stuff that I removed, and I'm going to put it together into something that can still do that stuff, because I do find it rather fascinating. But I was able to generate chord sequences programmatically off of basically randomness and kind of not that different from machine learning. But there was no real purpose behind it. It was just following rules, but there was an essential incuriousness about what it was doing. So it would make a nice chord sequence, and then it would go to a different chord following like my circle of fifths theory that I did. And I developed that and developed it until when it went to a new chord following the moderate randomness that it did, it would sound like it kind of made sense, but it kind of didn't really have a purpose behind doing it. It just did it by accident. I just had set it up so that it was doing something by accident that sounded like it made sense. That's the deal with stuff like this machine learning, stuff like a lot of the deep learning stuff, is you don't have motivation behind it necessarily. Or if you do, you have a very primitive negative form of motivation, which is, we're going to do all of this in order to increase engagement or something. Like increase engagement in YouTube videos. And the next thing you know, you've enabled the generation of fascists, because making people scared of other is a good way to increase engagement. So you got massive companies, massive computer industries focusing in on jerking people around to produce some kind of activity, and the activity they had in mind was very trivial. What they tried to produce was watch more videos. What they succeeded in producing was a nightmare geopolitical state. Be cautious of machine learning. Motivation is the thing that it lacks. You have to understand what you're trying to create when you pursue something like that, because you can make the tools of getting a result, but if you're not aware of your motivations and causes behind generating stuff, you can fall back on the accidental result. Back to channel. My last menu item is now Mackie, but case param 1 had been defined as it goes from Neve to SSL. So it needs to be, and again, E means it turns blue because it knows what that value is. So now I have a pop-up menu that will go from Neve to Mackie rather than Neve to SSL. There will be 5 entries into it, and it will also produce 5 outputs. The console is parameter param1. Now that's going to be a different set. Actually, I think that the first one is actually Neve, although I wonder. I could test this. I could find out whether we have a special case here, because we're going to be doing this anyways. If it doesn't hit one of these case statements, it will just not do anything. I had an earlier version of all this where I didn't have this break on the end, so everything was always just the SSL model, and that was a silly bug. That was a silly mistake. Regarding machine learning, I feel I can always do better than it. Let's put in a case 0. And let's test this out and see what we get. Here's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to set, let's see, it was the TIAC and then lastly the Mackie. These are not actually different from the SSL model, but it will go to these if I select those pop-up menu things. So we got that going on. The rest of it is already standard channel 8. So now we have something that assigns correct values, or at least it assigns what I tell it to for all these settings. I think it's time to find out whether IIR amount does what I think it does. Firstly, we will demonstrate this. This would be an interesting bug to catch too. I'm not sure whether it's a bug or not, but we're about to find out. Here's how I do that kind of thing. Oh, wait, no, that didn't work. I'm in the wrong place. That's channel 8. Channel 9 is on the desktop, sitting right here. You go to the build, release, and there it is right there. Turn on my little speaker, fire up some audio. What would be good? Meh, alien kittens, why not? And I know that it's going to be essentially the same as channel 8 so far with very few changes, so I can safely do that. These settings don't do anything. We can distort a little harder by using the drive control. We can use output control to cut it back. And we have 5 settings. API, SSL, TIAC, and Mackie. So that now works. So the next thing to do is go, let's see, high threshold means very little slew limiting. Low threshold means lots of slew limiting. So if I take the last one, Mackie, and tell it to be incredibly small slew limiting, what's going to happen is it's going to be super crazy distorted and messed up. I think that's probably enough. So we're going to find out whether we get to this case 5. It's either going to be the case 5 we hit or the case 0, and everything will change its name if everything's going to move over one step if it turns out that we can't reach this last one. If we can't reach this last one, I've done it right from the beginning, and I don't have bug fixing to do. Let's find out. That sounds very different. I think we got it. So obviously bright. TIAC, and then if we go to the Mackie, it's going to be darker all of a sudden because of the slew clipping. This is the function I'm going to put in for darkening up the Mackie thing. So it's going to be kind of like that anyway. You'll be getting something a little bit like that for the TIAC and the Mackie. They're going to clip out a little bit. And that means if we select, I'll put this back for now. Case 0. And this is something that, again, this is the problem that Reaper has, If I did this on the basis of a control that started at 0 and went to 1, I wouldn't have this problem. But apparently, Apple programs and Core Audio in general want to take the... well, hang on, let's check. Min value is kneve. Come on, show me the thing. Please. Please, I beg of you. And kneve is defined up here. Oh, okay, so the reason that's working for me is because I started it at 1 for the beginning. So I'm not actually using a entry 0. Reaper is capable of not looking up what I've defined these things to be, and instead going, oh, you're an indexed value, therefore you start with 0, and it produces wrong results. Either that or I started at 0 initially and it gave me that problem and I did this to try to fix it. I don't remember exactly which. But there is a correct outcome, which is I told it that 1 was neve. I don't actually even have to test this because I know that that is the case. Case 1 means I set it to the parameter that was marked neve on it. Now there's something else that I can do. I'm going to want to put some of these things in parameters. So output is param 3. Let's just override these guys. And one further thing, param 4 needs to be really small. So I don't think I can really adjust it very effectively without doing this to it. I can reverse this and figure out what the end result would be. Pow get param 4, comma 2. That means if I'm 0.1 on param 4, the actual result of IR amount is going to be 0.01. And if I'm 0.01, the result is going to be 0.0001, if I'm not mistaken, which is smaller than this. So I should have my adjustment thing. And if it becomes larger, what's going to happen is it's going to be a big high pass. It's going to roll off all the bass. And we'll test that out momentarily because I'm going to make sure that it works for me and sort of build it into both of these controls. Because I might as well, why not? And this is what I will be testing on. Now, if I set that up properly, I will have, well, let's find out. And we're also doing dielectric scale, so this is like capacitor 2 style capacitors for this high pass. Let's build it and see what we got. I can also do a sanity check to see whether it's handling high sample rate properly, seeing as I'm using Alien Kittens to do it. Here's channel 9 again. We got our TAC or Mackie. And 4th and 5th, oh, I forgot. I wanted to do something else here while I was at it. It's always wise. I wanted to update the labeling so that if I return to this, I'll know what I was doing. And I probably don't need to be concerned about these, so I'm just going to blank them. If I need to do anything with them later, I can. And now when I go in here, I should have stuff that's labeled appropriately so I remember what I'm doing if I get back to this some subsequent day. Here we go. So here's a sort of maxed out version. And then if we have it set to either of these guys, wouldn't matter which, the high pass, as you can see, can go really bright. Starts out really low. And it's definitely going to be lower than this. Again, it says hold the Option key while dragging for fine adjustments, so I should be able to tune in something appropriate. But I'll be listening to recordings of an actual thing and dialing in the super lows to feel about right using this. And then the highs, slew clip. Like SSL, the position is maybe around here. It's 8 something. And let's see, let's have a quick glance at this. Yeah, I can see the thresholds there. So yeah, if I use this thing, I assume it's working. Is this working for me? Yeah, it is. It said super dark all of a sudden. So the way these hit the slew clipping, because it's not a very obvious effect, SSL is around here, only really bright stuff hits it. API is around here. Neve is down here. A lot of it you're never going to notice with normal type sounds. You have to have sort of really high boosted sounds to hear it. And then our Mackie and TIAC are going to be like right down here. But they're also going to have some roll off from the alias control filter, and I'm going to be putting that in the next 15 minutes or so. And again, you can push this slew clip even farther. That's quite dark now compared to, I'll take the high pass. So it might end up with some, and that's actually a slew clip of literally 0, so. You can hear it being controlled here, and then it starts opening up, closing down. It's going to be in this range somewhere. So the remaining thing is to, let's open up Console 7 bus. Plugins, AU, because I know Console 7 bus has a dual biquad filter that I can use, so we'll use that. In fact, I've already reached for it for some other purpose. We'll save that, instantiate it. if we take something, we have to put it in a couple of different places. Here's our channel 9 place, so we want to look at our console 7 bus place. It's not going to show up anywhere here because the controls aren't going to be relevant, but we need to instantiate it here. So we got to include that little line of code there. I had put it in after last sample, so we'll do the same there. And now we have the biquad filters and they are set up to go. Now we're going to take this and start with what the console 7 bus setting is. We're not moving it to be user adjustable just yet. And this is the code that does that. And it says here, we've learned not to try and adjust threshold for sample rate. I believe what was happening was, for some reason, it was like becoming much more exaggerated at high sample rates. And so I dialed that part back out again. However, this biquad stuff will relate to sample rate just fine. Although, why did we not paste everything I needed to paste? Because I didn't copy everything I needed to copy. There we go. There, now it is defined. And then the next thing we do is grab these little snippets here. Part of it goes in front of everything, which probably should also include going in front of the capacitor modeling nonlinearity. Let's do that. Was up quite early this morning working on the synthesizer. Yeah, this is also C. The thing, you can program C in C++. Just because C++ has ugly features doesn't mean you have to use them. You can let the template do some of that. Like this stuff here, a lot of it is a form of C++. Like the way this is specified with the two colons is part of saying things in C++, but this coding is pretty much all straight C. You don't actually have to use C++ features constantly. And in something real-time, like a plugin, you probably don't want to. So let's see, there's our first input sample. That should be just fine. And where's our second one? Here it is. And there is our second. And that most definitely goes after all this stuff. I think including the output. Could be in front of or after the output. Let's do it after the output too. And when we run this, it should just straight up work. I don't know whether that means it's going to sound better right away. I do have some updates to make here. For instance, I wanted to try doing something interesting with channel 9. I would like to see the way it combines with, I feel like I'm going to take a bit of artistic license here. This golden ratio is part of a 3-part filter. And the first part is the 1.618, etc., etc. And that's on console 7 channel. So the entire console system winds up being a 3-part filter that is perfectly flat. And that's because this last part, the 0.5, combines with the other two to end up with a flat result. That said, I'm going to try having this be a relatively steep filter going in, and then the 0.618, that is a little shallower than Butterworth. But, oh, hello. So you think the audio glitch dropout thing is gone on a heavy project? That's good news, although it's bad news for Apple because it means they are not coding properly. That stuff, that code should have worked. It should not be giving me zeros when doing that logic comparison because it should be still functioning on long double. But if it has fixed the audio glitch dropout, that's really good news. I'd like to hear that from somebody else. I'm going to wait a little bit. I'm going to find out. I can't help you with closing the plugin window. That is going to be a logic bug. That's logic disposing of the window and interface that it draws. There's nothing in my code that touches any of that. So, I don't know, I wish I could help you more. I'm delighted that I was able to find something that maybe, again, I want to hear from some other people too, maybe gets rid of those audio glitches. Those should not be happening. But if I can stop them ever happening, even if they're not supposed to be happening, I'm happy. I can't debug all of Apple's stuff. But yeah, so one thing at a time. If big if true, put it that way, big if true, that means I can look after that in a bunch of different plugins and probably a lot of people will have better results because they're running stuff where Apple is converting long doubles to doubles or less without asking when they're not supposed to, in violation of the C++ spec. I don't even know how they'd be doing that. Go figure. But let's get back to this for a time being. I'm getting on towards closing up for the day, but if I do this, channel 9, let us I'm going to make a little temporary value. Excuse me while I do this. I could copy and paste, but I am not bothering at the moment. Turn blue, that proves that it's a real thing. And what's more, there is a order of operations thing where I could just string these things together and trust the computer to deal with it, and I always like making it explicit. It's clearer to me because this means different things. My end result is going to be going from 10K to 20K. And I do have to specify a thing. Now I've specified a thing. And copy and paste that in. Now we have got this factor here, and even if I'm running at 44.1K, it's not going to go quite that high, and I'll be able to do a sort of high frequency filter there, and it's on parameter 6, so let's do the same deal that I did before. I don't need console bus anymore. And mention it in the control names. Ultrasonic filter, that's parameter 6. See how I'm using these up? I'm going to end up with 10 if I have more things to do. I do not believe there is a capacitor to parallel for these biquad filters, by the way. Biquads don't really work that way. This is the Airwindows code that uses this technology. Let's build our results. We can also test our adjusting threshold for a sample rate thing, because I got multiple versions of Alien Kittens handy for exactly that reason. We'll do a little experiment. I'll have to remember what things sounded like, but first, let's test our anti-aliasing filter. Now what it should do, it'll go from 10K to 20K. So 20K here. And I sweep it down. Let's brighten things. A little darker. And this filter now has a little bitty filter peak on it. It's not a big one, it's a tiny little filter peak, but it's just a little accentuation around that roll-off period. So if I sweep it, it'll kind of sound like it. Supersonic. Actually, tell you what, let's stop this for the moment and let's extend the range a lot. $1000K to 20K. So I can sweep it all the way down to 1K, and most of it is going to be in this range. See, because the parameter that goes from 0 to 1 times 19K, and then I add 1K because I can't have it all go all the way down to 0. The biquad filter will be unhappy if I do. And now I can sweep it down and we can really hear what that filter peak sounds like. Because I could hear it, but I don't think it was obvious enough. Let's make it more obvious. And we also might be able to see that slight peakiness distort the output slightly. Oh, no, it's not going to. I'll tell you why. We have a saturation function in here. I thought it was, if the output filter, the output ultrasonic filter it had a presence peak like that, I might get output that was loud enough to clip. Even if I'm pushing as hard as I can, however, at full brightness, and then hear how we're getting a bit of a color here? Let's go full base too. Oh, maybe I am. Interesting. What if I drive? Just barely. Okay, never mind that foolishness. See, if I have drive at 0, it's raw input, and that can have hot peaks. It's not doing any of the distorting. And I think that's we'll leave it at that, because that's always been the case for this. So our ultrasonic filter now goes all the way down to 1K. And you can hear the I'm going to do is I'm going to set that in the high supersonic frequencies. I can have it in, you know what? Let's get some of this rolling right away. Cutoff goes to 30K now. Actually, no, 20. Yeah, if I did 29. Yeah, cutoff goes from 1 to 30K now, not 20K, 30K. If I run this at 44.1K, I believe I can make it crash. Let's find out. I'm going to first crash it, and then I'm going to do the version that doesn't crash. Because I believe that is the end result of what this does. It may not crash right upon instantiating. Ultrasonic filter, sweep it up there, it'll probably die. Yep. See, it flipped out. So we want to avoid this. It went crazy and blew up. So what we want is to measure something. I'm going to be enclosing both of these filters in, where do we find them? Here's one. And this is the code we're going to use to stop it blowing up and dying. Now it's checking to see whether biquad B is less than 0.5, because I believe that's the deal, is it has to be less than 0.5 for any of this to work. These are end result things. Same deal for biquad A, where I find it up here. Change that one part. Add that. Interestingly, this has a result. I've defined temp sample inside the if statement. What that means is I cannot now reuse it here. This is not going to work, I don't think. Yep, not declared in this scope. That's something you're going to see if you program. It used to be in the same level of everything else, but now it's inside these little brackets. When we go into the brackets, we're in another little world. And temp sample was declared in one of those worlds, and those brackets ended, and we popped out of that world and no longer have a concept of what temp sample would be. So we have to do it again. And if we redefine it, now it's happy and fine. And now what we're going to do is see if it blows up just in the edge case or not, because it might get too close. I believe 0.5 is our key there. So I'm not actually going to be using 0.5. What I'm going to be using is like 0.4999 something. But I think if I just skip over, we're now not applying the filter. Not applying filter? Or are we applying the filter? That seems funny. What do we got here? Well, you didn't crash, but why am I not getting my dark tone that I wanted? Oh, I'm not getting my dark tone because it's not running any of them, because guess what? It's checking whether these are the resonance. What I want is biquad be in a 0, not 1. Let's go fix that. I didn't want 1. That was just the resonance. I wanted 0. 0 translates to the relevant thing, so it was never applying it at all. Over we go to here. I don't know why I thought it was 1. And let's try that again and see what happens this time. Okay, filter works. Filter bypasses itself when it's too much. So the question becomes, I'm checking as to whether it's 0.5. If I get close enough to 0.5, does it still freak out and die? Like I can go right beyond and it will shut off. But can I make it blow up by getting right to the edge of the setting? Not yet. This suggests that I don't have to be too fussy about it. I can still do that, but 0.4999 is probably enough. I can get real close to this edge, because it's handling it pretty well. We are going to do that now. I'm going to do 3 nines. And that's going to be about the same, really. Oh, let's go to 4 nines just for laughs. It's only going to relate on low sample rate stuff. High sample rates, this biquad value is going to be something like 0.1 most of the time anyway. So now we have that, and also we now have the thing where we can tell the cutoff to be like 30K. And if we're running at 44.1K and it won't fit within the Nyquist frequency, it automatically switches itself off. This is what some people were wanting. People were not happy about the low sample rate stuff. Running the filter, which didn't really do anything useful. So, with that, oh, one further thing I was going to test, but there's no further code changes I really have to do it. I wanted to experiment with the threshold in more extreme settings, because the TAC and Mackie are going to have more slew clipping. So let's give that a shot. This is the 44.1K. Let's leave the high pass in so it's nice and bright. And so 0 is good and dark. Okay, I'm trying to set that in my mind. And the next time we instantiate this, it's going to have the same settings. Except it's going to be at 192K. What happens? Ultrasonic filter still works the same because it's the same biquad thingy. Let's see what this sounds like with a very high slew clip. going back and forth between 192 and 44.1K, trying to see if it sounds like it's about the same thing. I'm reasonably satisfied with that. Like, I know the high pass is going to behave the same. I think it's behaving the same. Let's focus on that a little bit too, because I was focusing on the slew clip, and I think that's the one where if I scaled it, it was applying its effect in a too exaggerated fashion, so something else was going on there. Let's listen for this high pass a bit. There, that is a weaker high pass. And then if we're doing the same thing, yeah, I think the high pass is scaling pretty well. So it's the slew clip that was giving me troubles, and that seems to be behaving itself too. So that concludes my, here, let me zoom in a little bit. That includes my day of work on the new channel, Channel 9. Channel 9 will come out once I sort out what the correct values are for the TAC and Mackie examples I'm able to find. Because the purpose of it is to move around my mouse pads a little bit. The purpose of it is to do a channel version of those sought after mixers, and I think it's doable. I'm just going to have to wing it. I'll do my best and try to hear it out and get it right. But yeah, so again, I'm going to check and see whether other people are also finding that the bug fix on the spiral algorithm is helping them. It's one person, that's good. Like, I'm just about willing to go forwards on the basis of just one report of like, oh yeah, that fixed the thing, except for that it still crashes when you close a window, and I can't help that because that's Logic's problem. But if I can help the other thing, which is also Apple's problem, and my code should work just fine without having to apply the abs value in both places. But since it doesn't, I can work around Apple's problem for them. You're welcome. And I'll have a bunch of updates if that becomes a thing. But that should happen pretty soon if we follow up and find out that that is really a thing. You saw the list of stuff. If that's as much a thing as I thought it is, the plugins that will be updated are Console 7 Bus, Console 7 Cascade, Console 7 Channel, ADT, BitGlitter, Channel 6, Channel 7, Channel 8, the new Channel 9, Distortion, Focus, Hold, Pop, Spiral, Spiral 2, Tape, and Unbox. Will all be updated and we'll all fix that problem, because they'll all be facing that problem on Catalina, because Catalina doesn't know what it's doing with long double numbers. So, yeah. That'll be interesting. That's not that big of a update load, because like you've seen, I can do that in a moderately automated way, and it becomes just, a few days of heavy recompiling everything. And that's all good. I can even make sure that everything is up to date as far as the floating point noise shaping and stuff, or the floating point dithering. So I will be reinvestigating that stuff and making sure that everything is brand spanking new. And we'll see. It seems plausible. Like if one person has been like, this super duper fixed that one problem that was really a thing before, I'd call that a very good sign. And we'll go forward from there. And again, you will see channel 9 once I sort out what the correct levels for those 3 parameters for the TIAC and the cheap Daft Punk style Mackie board are. And that's going to require me going and hunting down some examples of them and a bit of critical listening and bringing the plugin over and being able to listen to it on like the real system, not the laptop plugged into little boombox speakers. So yeah, so let's put chat back. Oh, and the question Francis asked, that's not what channel 9 is about. It is for testing purposes. It is so I can dial in those values to exactly match examples of the hardware I'm trying to mimic. That's why it gets to have those labels on the controls. I have a plugin called High Pass that does that. I have a plugin called Sue, which does that. And ultrasonic already exists. You could take biquad filters and make them do the thing that I'm doing. So all of those things are already available in other plugins. Specifically the ultrasonic thing, the biquad filters I've got aren't set up to go beyond the audible range all by themselves. But if you do have them do that, you can get right up to the Nyquist frequency using them. And the going beyond the audible range is more useful for stuff like this, where I've got like a peakiness that's super high in the high frequencies there. And I'll be controlling things by kind of dialing in the tone around that stuff. I'm probably going to be using my own recordings to just try to get the right sort of vibe going on. That knowing, it might even be worth fiddling with the API, Neve, etc., because I know I'm going to want to have dedicated ultrasonic frequencies for each of those. And I'll be dialing in like, when I'm playing a nice 96K drum recording with good mics and stuff, and I'm adjusting that, what kinds of high frequency air will I get off of that recording going through just straight up channel 9, or maybe a couple of channel 9s cascaded into each other? And what sounds most like either your API, SSL, or Neve tone based on that? Oh good, I'm glad that you like it, because I'm doing that exactly for that reason. The idea is that it's approachable. That's kind of also why I'm doing a version of Reverb with much fewer controls coming out. That'll do many of the same things, but it just, everything works together to get to the target goal that you're trying to accomplish. So yeah. We'll see you folks later. And hope you like the channel 9 that's going to be coming out. And sooner than that, you will be seeing updates from me, assuming that this bug fix for Catalina is bearing fruit. I don't know whether I can find that same problem elsewhere, but I have certainly looked up all the places where it is part of the thing. And if all goes well, we will be able to completely solve that, because I didn't realize you needed to be that cautious with that stuff. And again, C++ says you don't have to do this, but apparently Catalina says you do. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.